If we are nihilist, if we think this is all just a random accident of astrophysics, it makes the achievement of the future that you reference much more difficult to achieve within the minds and hearts of people who think that this has no higher purpose than immediate physical indulgence and comfort. If we have the opportunity to platform, for instance, ibogaine as a breakthrough therapeutic in the most existential crises we have in front of us as American society, and those are the twin crises of addiction and trauma that are in existence at scale, then we offer up an opportunity for individuals to understand concretely, individually, persuasively, how they are sacred, uniquely sacred, and how they are the ultimate expression of that benevolent love that our eternal Creator has at the very heart of the Creator's essence.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Love Conquers Fear podcast. I am back from beautiful New Orleans. I've mentioned on prior episodes that I was there receiving an award that I absolutely did not expect. I'm a proud UT Austin undergrad, and I went to Wharton for my MBA, but Tulane University decided to award me as Entrepreneur of the Year. This was something that President Fitz, who I absolutely love, decided to give me. And on the day that I gave the speech, I was thinking, what am I going to speak about? I knew it was going to be something around Love Conquers Fear, but I opened myself up to the universe to see what would come in. And there were a couple of things that floated in, the beautiful nature of consciousness. One was a memory that I just completely forgot about, that's about 20 years old, which was rooted in a very magical occurrence, which happened for me personally in New Orleans, which helped lead to the launch of Bizarre Voice, which is the company that I started with popularized customer reviews all over the world and had over $1 billion IPO. That floated into my consciousness. I hadn't thought about what happened in New Orleans related to me deciding to start Bizarre Voice until that moment in 20 years. And then another that floated in, which was just so beautiful, is I know that my mom's soul and dad's soul, send me messages. I've seen it many times in meditation, sometimes in psychedelic journeys. But my mom pushed into my field of consciousnness a song that she loved, which is by this band called America. And the song is named Magic. And it's so funny if you watch the video on YouTube of them singing this song. They're actually singing it in heaven. They're singing it among the clouds. And I knew that that was my mom being playful with me. And so I made my whole speech about magic, the magic of beautiful New Orleans and all of the incredible things that have happened there, including the birth of jazz. The magic of all of my family moments that were centered around New Orleans, starting with my dad taking me there when I was a young boy. I grew up here in Austin, and it was a very small town back then. My dad loved to go there and eat, so we'd do road trips there, and just so many great memories with him. The first ever daddy-daughter trip I did with our daughter, who is at Tulane, she's 21 now and a junior, was to New Orleans, and all the magic that occurred with that. And then the magic of what's going to happen with humanity as we ascend to create abundance for everyone on this planet. And it was just, it was a speech where I was really flowing with a lot of love. It was an absolutely beautiful evening. I was also there to speak at a number of classes, judge the startup competition. Huge congrats to Dylan and the Zactix team for winning the startup competition. They're off on a great entrepreneurial journey. And I was lucky enough to see Michael Lewis interview Michael Pollan, who came out with his new book, A World of Peers, which is all on the nature of consciousness. This was in conjunction with Walter Isaacson's Book Fest, which happens every year. This was the 5th year at Tulane University, and it's open to everybody in New Orleans. And I think 40% of the people had actually flown in for it, 20,000 attendees. And it was just an incredible conversation about the nature of consciousness. That's a great book. I've recommended it before on the podcast. But in that book specifically, he really critiques the AI kind of tech crowd, which very quickly, assumes that AI is either sentient or soon will be sentient, in the critique that actually consciousness and thinking is a full body exercise. It's not just about IQ, it's about feelings, and it's about, the field of consciousness, which we've discovered through Higgs boson at CERN. And it's just a great book, and he really leaned into that on stage, which I think was super helpful. Anyways, it was an amazing week, and now I'm fully into South by Southwest. I saw a speech last night given by a guy who is working on decoding animal language and is predicting that we're going to have that by 2029 or 2030. And I actually wrote a short story back in November, which is about how Dr. Alexander Bliss, who's the protagonist in my science fiction novella, The Lattice, decodes whale language and what whales have to teach us, because they've been around for millions of years. Homo sapiens have been on this planet for 300,000 years. The planet's 4.54 billion years old. And last night, Aza, who is leading a nonprofit focused on this, leaned into that as well. He said, what are we going to learn from animals that have been on the planet much, much longer than us? And what is it going to teach us about unifying and really ascending together, and treating this planet as the beautiful jewel that it deserves to be treated, and having a love and divinity in our heart for all things. So it was amazing evening, and because it's South by Southwest, I had a great magical thing happen, and that's that Bryan Hubbard, who is the co-founder of the Americans for Ibogaine initiative, is on the podcast today. You've heard me speak about that initiative many times on Love Conquers Fear. We were very proud to host him and former Governor Rick Perry at our home to raise money for this initiative. And wow, what an honor to have him here with us. Bryan, it's good to be here with you, buddy.
It's an honor to be with you, Brett. Thank you for your hospitality and thoughtful invitation to join you here in your home.
Well, you bet. I'm such a big fan of you, and I've described you to many friends as really a force of nature, someone who absolutely is on this mission to save people that need to be saved. I mean, it's kind of incredible and tragic to think about that we've lost 4 times as many vets since the Iraq War to suicide in America than we did to combat. And, we need to really have more cures for them. And the fact that you and Governor Perry were able to get $50 million of funding passed here in the Texas House with the support of Governor Abbott is really saying something. And I know it's been a journey for you to get to that point. So maybe we just start out with why this? Why is this your soul song? And how does especially, are there any elements of your childhood and growing up that really connect to this?
You asked the exact perfect question to begin our interview together. My journey toward ibogaine began in my earliest of years. I came up in one of Virginia's 5 coal mining counties, a working class family. My parents were very young when they married, and I think like a lot of young folk who come up in hard circumstances, they believe their love for each other, as they understood it in their youth, was their escape from the misery in which they lived. Mm-hmm. And they got married young. By the time I came along, their marriage was coming to an end. Mm-hmm. And my earliest memories were of screaming and cussing and chaos between them. I was very blessed to have 2 magnificent men who were my grandfathers be very active and engaged with me from those earliest days. Where I grew up, you call your grandpa's Papaw. So yeah. I had a Papaw Martin and a Papaw Hubbard, and both of them came out of large families. Both of them were the sons of very hard drinking men. And while they had brothers, they were very unique in that both of them were men of great faith. And I can remember being a very scared child. And they knew it. And whenever I would go and visit with them, and they spent as much time with me as they could. At some point before I would return home, whether that was with mom and dad, or subsequently mom, or then it was just dad, they would put me on their lap and put their arms around me and say, Papa knows you're scared, but you need to know a couple of things. First of all, Papa loves you. Papa prays for you every day. But the most important thing that you have to know is that God loves you. God has a special and unique purpose to achieve with your life. And no matter how bad it gets, how scared you are, or how difficult things seem, don't you ever forget what Papa's telling you. If you will hold on to that truth, it's going to see you through. Now, I was just 3, about to turn 4, when I can remember these conversations.
My grandfather had a huge impact on me growing up. He was the oldest of his siblings in the Depression.
Yes, sir.
And was deserted by his father, who is an alcoholic. And he actually had to help his mother, my great-grandmother, raise his siblings as the oldest one. And so I got lots of great memories with him that I've talked about on the podcast. But sorry to interrupt.
No.
It really triggers that in me that I've had the same kind of force.
You know, I would not make a guess as to your or anyone else's age, but I think that we may be part of the same generational cohort, what we would consider or call Generation X.
Yeah, I'm 54.
I turned 50 in October.
Okay.
And I consider us to be among the most magnificently blessed people because of the grandparents we got to have.
Yeah.
The folks who came out of that greatest generation, who faced both physical and spiritual deprivations that just are mind-blowing and beyond our modern ability to comprehend.
That's right.
You know, I think about my papaws. Both of them are grade school educated. One of them was pulled out of school when he was 16, hadn't managed to get through the 6th grade. The other one stopped when he was in the 3rd.
Wow.
They were both underground in the coal mines at age 16, and they spent 40 years of their life down there, facing death every day to keep their families fed and clothed and housed. Neither one of them had a full set of fingers, but they both were just tremendously gentle, loving human beings who conveyed the light of that love to me and everyone who was around them. And I would always be astounded, especially in teenage years watching American politics, at not just their individual lack of bitterness, but the lack of bitterness within that generation. They were thankful that they were able to overcome what they did.
Yeah.
They were thankful to have fought for truly the existential survival of the country through the Depression, through World War II, and ultimately got to see the fall of totalitarian communism. They led all of that.
Yeah.
And they went out of this world with the salutation of honor they should have received. I am so glad to know about your grandfather and the fact that yours and mine came out of the same fabulous generational timber.
Yeah, and shaped us. I mean, he grew up. He was very academic, so he actually became one of the greatest mathematics professors at UT Austin. But he put himself through school, often by tutoring people on subjects he didn't even know.
How about that?
And he was a very, very giving professor. Like really, I mean, he taught the hardest mathematics classes, and he quizzed me all the time on math growing up. And it was kind of uncomfortable being around him sometimes because of that, because it was things I hadn't learned. But it taught me a lot, and ultimately led to my best subject.
Oh, yeah. He was training you well early on.
He really was.
If I had not had the two of them convey that most significant of all truths, there's no question but that if I were alive at all, I would certainly not be sitting here as I am today.
Yeah.
I tell folks all the time that the lesson that they taught me about The sacred nature of life and unique individual purpose are the things that kept me from being in some dark hole that I might would look out from and wonder what someone who has held jobs like I have was going to come do to pull them out. And as we recognize as fellow Gen Xers, and I hope you don't mind me being familiar enough to call us that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
We truly are the first generation, at least, of Americans to have experienced the mass dissolution of family and community. Mm-hmm. We were the first wave to go through everything that involved. Mm-hmm. What frightens me is to think about the number of people our age and younger who never had anything which resembled sanctuary from chaos, the stability of an unconditionally loving relationship with an adult that they could trust and know would be there for them, or an affirmation of their individual spiritual significance. If I had to guesstimate, I would say at least half of the country have never had one or perhaps all of those three things.
Wow.
And it goes a long way to explaining why we see what we see right in front of us every day.
Yeah, yeah. The rise in loneliness and depression at a time where we are supposedly the most connected we've ever been. And a lot of that, I think, is, family, it definitely starts with family, but a lot of it is algorithmic manipulation too. It's a constant leveraging our base fears and the algorithm seeking to keep us just clicking in the maze looking for cheese, whether it's social media, whether it's the media. And this is not a critique of the free press, it's a critique of the business model.
Amen.
I've made the point on this podcast many times that people should rewire their brain, deprogram and reprogram with news like the Progress Network, with news like Fix the News, where it's all of the positive things that are constantly happening in the world that are algorithmically buried. It's every day we're having amazing scientific breakthroughs, many reasons people should be hopeful. They just need to tune into those because they really are just buried.
You talk about measures of hopefulness. I've always, since I was a child, I've been a close follower of American history and politics and just the general civic health of the society. And there have been three statistical metrics of what we can kind of point to as the state of mind of the country collectively. One is that what they call the wrong track, right track number, the number of people in America who think things are going well and we're heading in the direction that we should be versus those that don't. We've not had a positive right track direction number going on 30 years. And at least over the past 20. It's not gotten much above 36% in terms of the right track. A recent Pew Center poll, which surveyed attitudes toward the federal government, found that exactly 18% of all citizens have confidence in federal leadership to do the right thing. And that was in December of 25. More shockingly, that number hasn't gone above 30% since 2007.
Wow.
And there was a Wall Street Journal poll that was published, it was before the end of last year, in which 80% of respondents expressed their belief that the American dream is dead. So when we look at where we're at versus what you, through a futurist lens, can see, there is a wide gulf between what you're able to know through your discernment of information and what mass media is driving through that algorithmic conquest of the society that you observe that's part of a business model separate and apart from what should be a free and vigorous press that educates the public as to their reality.
Yeah. Well, it's putting profits over people, and it's because of the worship of money, which every spiritual tradition, every religious text talks about the fact that the only path to happiness is found within. And that's why this is called Love Conquers Fear. It's the unification between all the spiritual traditions are that we have to get to a point where we allow love to conquer fear within ourselves, to act with extreme agency like you're doing with the Americans for Ibogaine initiative. And then we can help others do that. And then if everybody did that, humanity ascends, and heaven and earth come together, whether you look at that as mystically or metaphorically. And I look at it as both. Both things can be true at the same time. Spirituality and science can both be true.
Yes, sir.
But I'll tell you that I'm not shying away in my book, which coming out in June, Love Conquers Fear, with the subtitle Humanity, AI, and the Age of Abundance for All, on the problems we have. It's not shying away from any of the problems we have, including even, this is one that I don't hear a lot of people talk about, but it's a problem that's existed for millennia, the objectification of women. Mm-hmm. I was raised by a very strong mom, and all the love I have in my heart, started with her. And, it wasn't until the late 1970s in America that women had the right to have checking accounts. Women didn't have the right to vote until just over 100 years ago, and women of color is 50 years after that. And a lot of what you see around the world comes out of that in terms of the problems. And so we have to transcend that root as well. Realize that we're 99.9% the same across this beautiful planet. Women are the ultimate creators.
Yes.
They literally give life. I don't think God is gendered, but if God was, God would be female, because birthed the universe, the Big Bang.
Yes.
That's the ultimate creator, the ultimate technologist. But yeah, getting back to, your purpose. So having that childhood and then leading up to this initiative, like, what was the moment where you realized this initiative was your soul song, that it was what your grandfather was teaching you, that this was it, this is where you're going to really make your mark for humanity?
I heard a recent message, it's been within the past 18 months, which said that our Creator is never malicious and often subtle. Mm-hmm. And that we have to look for those repetitious patterns in our life that are there to get our attention and to teach us what it is that we're to learn and perhaps to do with our lives. Mm-hmm. So growing up, I had a very idealized presentation of American history and civics. I was taught by some just fabulous teachers who had come of age during World War II, who were part of that greatest generation or who had been trained by those ladies. They had high expectations, they were strict disciplinarians, and they were red, white, and blue all the way. Mm-hmm. My formative years coincided with the Reagan presidency, and regardless of what one may think from a partisan perspective, my recollection of that time was of a tremendous amount of optimism. Mm-hmm. Marked by essentially the inverse statistical realities of public perception, of trust and belief in government, and of upward mobility that we see today. I believed growing up that going to law school would teach me how to defend truth, justice, and the American way. Mm-hmm. That's what the law was an instrument of justice. And boy, did I want to get in there and do everything I could to serve my country, which I adored. So I went to law school, and the first thing that I learned was that law is not a synonym for truth, morality, or justice. And then I learned over the course of 16 years of practice that law is often nothing other than an instrument that is used by the hand that pays for the power to wield it, to bind, torture, and kill the truth. I had an accidental legal career, and I say accidental because it was not by design. I ended up practicing workers' compensation law across Kentucky for 16 years, representing Walmart, Tennessee Valley Authority, and Tyson Foods exclusively statewide. Now, your audience may say, well, those are three big, powerful corporations. That had to be the hand that was paying to use the law. Well, in fact, it was very much the opposite. At the time that I practiced, Kentucky had two governors who were very vigorously supported and funded in their campaigns by the plaintiff's personal injury bar. So ambulance chasers were a significant constituency of these two governors.
Right.
One in particular who was in office for 8 of my 16 practice years. And the way in which workers' compensation law is practiced is you have administrative law judges who are appointed by the governor. The folks who nominate those judges are lawyers appointed by that governor. So you had a scenario whereby the donors to the governor were appointed to the Judicial Nomination Committee, and then those lawyers selected the judges that they wanted that the governor would prove, who would then come and sit on their cases. And Brett, you know, I think probably most people from watching shows and through their own civic education think, well, the law is a set of rules, and these rules are applied by a judge who is impartial and fair to circumstances to get to a predictable outcome that's consistent with reality, and that's what we call justice. Well, most legal systems and legal outcomes don't bear any resemblance to that perceived expectation and understanding. Certainly not in my practice life.
Right.
I could look at the judge and the lawyer on my case and know exactly what was going to happen before I even looked at the facts of the case. Facts of the case were secondary.
Why?
This was a political patronage system that masqueraded as a legitimate legal system. So what was its commodity? What did it trade? Well, in years that coincided with the onset and explosion of the opioid epidemic, it traded in the misery of other human beings for the financial benefit of the volume practitioner of plaintiff's personal injury cases and the doctor's office that had as its boutique practice the delivery of treatments of chronicity to the personal injury claimant through either workers' compensation, motor vehicle accident, or Social Security disability. There is I think it's on Apple TV, there's a documentary about a volume personal injury practitioner in Kentucky called, his name was Eric C. Kahn, and I think the title of the documentary is called The Great Con.
Okay, we'll put it in the show notes, yeah.
And it was about this, and I sat in this gentleman's office and took depositions there with one of his law partners. It was about this prolific practitioner of Social Security disability who was the single largest awardee of Social Security disability fees for a number of years. And what he had basically done was he bought a Social Security disability judge in West Virginia, put him on the payroll. He made a steady referral to one particular psychological expert who was essentially a payroll evaluator, and he just funneled through this Social Security volume disability practice individuals through this rotation of disability evaluation, award, and then fee back to him. And oftentimes this lawyer would specifically refer his clients to doctors who he knew would give them the right diagnosis along with the right medication. So what I observed emerge in Kentucky between 2000 and 2016 was what I called the doctor-lawyer disability complex, which was a symbiotic relationship between plaintiff's personal injury lawyers and family physicians, pain treatment physicians, and unscrupulous surgeons who knew exactly what they were doing in terms of trading desperate human beings back and forth, and on the lawyer side collecting the fee, and on the doctor side, creating a lifetime patient through either, at a minimum, the administration of absolutely nuclear combinations of pharmacology. The OxyContin Xanax combination was one I saw repeatedly. Now, what were these conditions that merited this sort of trafficking of people through this treatment and personal injury ecosystem? There was one deposition that I took probably 200 times. And what I'm going to describe to you is an amalgamation of an individual. This person was usually a white female from Eastern Kentucky. Eastern Kentucky is where Lyndon Johnson kicked off the war on poverty in Martin County, Kentucky, back in 1965. There's a picture of him sitting in a wood house with a tin roof and a dirt floor, and that was at home. And not that long ago, just about 60 years. This woman from East Kentucky would be somewhere between the ages of 45 and 70. She would have worked like a dog her whole life, in usually, entry-level service jobs, a cashier or a night manager at a convenience store, or if she was at Walmart, some equivalent position. She would have had a family. Her husband may have worked in the mines, was either disabled or chronically unemployed because there's not much there to put people to work that would give really a living wage. This woman would have maybe worked for, a dozen or more different employers, but without any substantial break in her work life. And then she would be at work and she would have picked up a box, or she would have had a slip and fall. It would have produced, there would have been an accident that would have produced an injury that should have been recoverable. But after she had it, she would have made her way either to a doctor, who usually referred her to a lawyer, or vice versa. By the time this woman got to me, she would have had every diagnostic study that can be performed of her under the skin performed. CT scans, MRI scans, nerve conduction studies, whole body CT scans, to understand what was the nature of what this lady would have described as an all-encompassing, global, head-to-toe, debilitating pain that she could not overcome. She would inevitably be given high-powered opioid medication combined with high-powered psychotropic medication, either antidepressants, anti-anxieties, or a combination of both. When I would come and take this lady's deposition, she may have already have undergone a surgery by a doctor who found some sort of minimal finding on a scan that justified opening her up, cutting on her spine, perhaps fusing her bones together. And this is worth noting. I never saw a successful surgery.
Wow.
Every person who underwent a surgery, if they were not endorsing total disability beforehand, they were endorsing it on the other hand. And yet, despite these judges who would sit on these cases and heard hundreds of times people say, oh, well, my back hurt and I went and I got a fusion and now I really can't do anything. They just kept stamping those awards through over and over and over again at scale.
Wow.
So when I would go and take this lady's deposition, I was never mean. I would always be very patient, and I would want to hear and to understand as much as she would be willing to tell me on her own. I would get her to discuss in full extent the nature of her work history, the kind of life she had had, get her full personal background, and then have her talk about her work accident. When she was done, I would ask her to tell me about all of her pain symptoms. And it was consistently this description of a globalized, debilitating pain which prevented her from hardly being able to put her clothes on. And then I would take out the results of her diagnostic studies, and I would go through every single one. And I would just very patiently but persistently point out that none of her radiographic studies, none of her diagnostic evaluations revealed the existence of any physical pathology which could possibly explain the unbelievable extent of her endorsed and described physical pain and debility. When I would make this observation, this woman would inevitably start to cry.
Wow.
And she would look at me and she would say, Mr. Hubbard, I ain't a doctor. The only thing I can tell you is, from the time I open my eyes of the morning until the time I lay down at night, I hurt from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet. And it is all I can do to make myself get up out of the bed and make myself a cup of coffee every single day. Now, Brett, as a young lawyer, you're trained to be very skeptical and to aggressively defend your client's interests. And probably the first 25, 30, 40 times I saw this, I thought it was just part of the performance preparation that the lawyer had given to make sure that the tears were turned on at the right strategic time in my questioning. I didn't believe it. But I saw this for years. And I saw it across different lawyers' offices where it wasn't just the volume practitioner who had made a trade in doing this. It was lawyers that I knew were people of integrity, who were not here to run a volume business, who were there to earnestly and sincerely pursue the very best outcome for their client. And I saw it so much, I just was like, why is this such a ubiquitous dynamic in this caseload? And one day, I can remember driving down the road and it was just like a light bulb went off. And I thought, these women are truly, genuinely in pain. They feel it.
Right.
But it's not their work accident. What I am seeing is a human being who has come to the total end of any hope for a life that resembles a life of dignity and autonomy and anything that would resemble just a basic level of prosperity that they can rest with. These women's backs, psychologically, spiritually, have been broken. And what I am seeing is the physical manifestation of pain and debility that comes from a broken-hearted, broken-souled human being who cannot take any more of the punishment of the life they're having to live.
Wow.
And the response of our systems to that was to advertise lawyers, advertise pain management clinics, advertise prescription drugs, and to answer their reality with lawsuits, surgeries, and pain clinics.
Yeah.
And if they weren't disabled when they entered into that system,
Yeah.
they were disabled when they came out.
Wow.
And that was kind of the start of a lesson that I saw that was given to me hundreds of times over 16 years. The same repetitious pattern over and over and over again of what is supposed to be a legal/justice system operating as a political patronage system, not offering anything that is a genuine, true solution that is restorative of this individual's life, but rather something that is far more exploitative, far more predacious, and ends up with a ruined and broken human being at the end of the process. That was the legal career.
Wow. That is super tragic and super infuriating. And I can see exactly how you're forged in the fire with that for what your grandfather was telling you, which is, I'm going to save people that are broken like this. What was the moment that led to the introduction of your knowledge of ibogaine? You probably didn't even know about it at that point in your life.
No.
I didn't know about it personally until recently, even though I'm very pro-psychedelic. I didn't even know it existed until maybe 2 years ago.
So I'll give you kind of an abbreviated overview of my state government service that followed legal practice. I rotated out of representing those companies in workers' compensation defense, and I had a series of leadership positions in Kentucky state government. I led the state Social Security disability system, its child support enforcement system. I led a law enforcement agency called the Office of Medicaid Fraud and Abuse Control, which had as its job the investigation and prosecution of medical providers on the state's Medicaid system. Within that role, I had a caseload made up of medically assisted treatment providers who were essentially charging Medicaid patients cash off the books in exchange for what were maximum dosage, maximum duration prescriptions of Suboxone, or what's generically known as buprenorphine. Buprenorphine is the evidence-based best practice medication for the treatment of opioid dependency. It is an opioid with which to treat opioid addiction.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And I was receiving telephone calls from local officials all across the state saying our communities are flooded with these Suboxone pills. These doctors don't even bother to come into the clinic. They're just writing prescriptions right and left, and we're flooded with this. When I ran the state Social Security disability system, I was tasked with understanding While Kentucky was second only to West Virginia in terms of the percentage of its adult population getting this benefit. And I learned that 95% of people who go on to Social Security disability never come off. That is their life, and that's where they stay. And we're talking about a life that doesn't resemble prosperity.
Right.
We're talking about a subsistence hand-to-mouth check that comes with a state-provided and federally funded medical card. That's your life.
Right.
And you likely have a housing subsidy if you don't own something, or food stamps to kind of supplement that income.
Right.
It is an impoverished existence that this person who supposedly can't do anything anymore is going to live if that's their safety net. So when I ran that system, within my first month on the job, we had an administrator from the Social Security Administration who oversaw the state of Kentucky's state employee workforce that ran this, come in and pay what's called the home office visit. I wish I had had a recording on to hear what was said right off the bat. This individual began the meeting with the top management team by saying, folks, claims are down, and that's bad because claims equal budget. And what I came to understand was that the Social Security Administration had as its primary preoccupation and concern its own acquisition of budgetary appropriation from the federal government. And the surest way to do that was to make sure that the program grew and grew and grew as much as possible. So the governor of Kentucky at the time asked that we do what no state had ever done before, and that was to undertake a study to understand what was driving this program's growth. And we took a number of different statistical measurements. I assembled a team of policy experts, and just to kind of, and I promise we'll get to ibogaine here just as a minute because this is a springboard right into it. Kentucky's population between 1980 and 2015 grew 20%. Enrollment in the Social Security Disability Program grew 249%. Childhood enrollment in that program grew 449%. The issuance of opioid prescriptions on a per capita basis to every Social Security disability recipient in Kentucky grew 210% over 15 years, from 68 doses per recipient to 168.
Wow.
The issuance of habituating psychotropic medication to children grew 168% separately from let's see, what was that? It was 275 psychotropic pills per Social Security disability child up to 457 per Social Security disability child. Massive government systems are enthroned upon the helplessness of powerless people. They commodify problems that they are supposed to solve by monetizing sustained human misery. And this was Exhibit A for that reality. Because of the reputation that had kind of been established as a no-nonsense, get-it-done public servant, I was asked to be the first chairman of the Kentucky Opioid Commission, to stand the commission up and to get it operating. And its job was to distribute and oversee the distribution of about $1 billion in settlement funds that would be used to combat the opioid epidemic at home, and Kentucky is where it began. I was asked what the commission needed to achieve, and I named some priorities, and I said, look, our existing treatment options are opioids with which to treat opioids or abstinence-based programs. They have unacceptably mediocre levels of success.
Right.
We need to foster a therapeutic breakthrough for the treatment of opioid dependency. I come from a family that has a wicked generational relationship with alcohol, going all the way back to all of my great-grandfathers. In 2018, I read in Scientific American that there had been a remarkable small observational study at NYU that demonstrated that the psilocybin mushroom had a dramatic impact on the reduction of alcohol consumption among people who had been alcoholics for decades.
Yep.
This caught my attention. It piqued my curiosity. As I continued to follow reports around this really unbelievable discovery about what I always pejoratively considered to be a bunch of hippie drugs, I became independently curious. I happen to have a friend whose sister provided psilocybin within the underground. And despite having been president of the Teenage Republicans in high school and president of the College Republicans in college, I approached my buddy and I said, I want to learn what this is and I want to understand it. So between 2018 and 2022, when I first took on the commission job, I had a series of psilocybin experiences, which absolutely persuaded me that plant medicine is of divine origin and that they have a very specific role to play within individual and collective human development. Had I not had that psilocybin experience or series thereof, I would not have picked up the phone in July of 2022, 1 month after I was on the job, to reach out to an author, a lady by the name of Julia Rybelt. She had written beautifully over the course of years about her own individual journey with psychedelics and how they had helped her overcome a life of miserable treatment-resistant depression, anxiety, and a near-fatal eating disorder. On July the 29th of 22, I spoke with her and I said, what can you tell me about the world of psychedelics and whether there is anything that has an impact on opioid dependency?
Right.
And she said, have you ever heard of ibogaine? And I said, no, I have not. So July 29th of 2022 was the beginning of what has now brought us almost 4 years later to the point that the state of Texas adopted a plan that started on a legal pad in my dining room table in Lexington, Kentucky, as the single largest public investment in psychedelic research and medical development in history, and the first time that an individual state has ever undertaken direct drug development to respond to multiple public health crises within its borders that are representative of the national reality, and that is $50 million to create a public-private partnership to drive ibogaine through the FDA's drug development process to conclusion.
Yeah, which is incredible, and no one could have predicted it would be scripted this way. But I'm so happy that it has been scripted this way. I mean, I had dinner with Governor Perry when he was our governor. At the governor's mansion, sitting right next to him. And I just would have never guessed, that night that, like, you fast forward, that he'd be at our house with you, talking about the transformational aspect of ibogaine to save these vets. And, that night you and him gave such passionate speeches. I mean, it was just really, really inspiring to everybody there, and raised some significant money, and it led eventually to Deborah and I supporting with some friends that were really moved by that, to save some, hopefully we know that this works most of the time, some IDF vets who in Israel went through the horror of Hamas's attack on Israel October 7th with just unspeakable horrors. I'm Jewish, and I never even wanted to watch any of the videos of what happened, but I read enough to have nightmares for a couple of months.
Yes, sir.
Just really unspeakable horrors. But the fact that there is this plant that grows in Gabon, Africa, that has been used for thousands of years, is my understanding. I mean, is that right? Thousands of years.
That is my understanding as well. For longer than certainly the United States has been around, and longer than anyone can find in a written record.
Yeah. And I had Brian Marescu on the podcast for episode 48. He's the author of The Immortality Key, and the evidence. He was like a Indiana Jones professor, like going and spelunking in the Vatican and really trying to find what was in the magical chalice in the temple that helped spark religion and these mystical experiences. And they found that there was ergot in it, which is how you derive LSD, or it's one way to derive LSD. And And so it seems like, divine connection, spiritual connection has been happening with humanity for a long, long time, typically in indigenous cultures, with these plants, which is fascinating. This and his book covers how then the Catholic Church really tried to demonize those indigenous cultures, because they wanted to control. This is what you need to think about God and heaven and et cetera, versus a direct communion. So we talked about that a lot on that episode. It's a fantastic book. But I mean, it's really fascinating that, God, this Mother Gaia, however you want to refer to this force that loves us all, has provided us with a plant that is kind of a reset button on people's lives when they're really, really suffering. That's just incredible to think about. And when did you first start to see it actually transform, either opioid addicts or veterans? At least with Governor Perry, I know that he's been primarily focused on vets, and it's saving their lives from really suicidal thoughts. But what was the moment for you where you first actually saw it transform someone?
Well, I got to see it in real live action when I traveled to one of the clinics in Mexico in November of 23 to receive the ibogaine experience. I had been convinced from the time that I decided to go public with this initiative in Kentucky that if I were going to advocate for it, the only way I could properly do it, especially in light of the opposition and the fear-mongering that was generated by that opposition, was to go and do it, and to be able to understand at least how it would operate and work on me.
Right.
I really didn't know the veteran reality first. My first exposure was through the voice and experience of people who had had terminal cases of opioid dependency. The first person I spoke with who shared their ibogaine experience was a young woman by the name of Juliana Mulligan, who's currently a licensed clinical social worker in New York City. She also is a wonderful informational resource for people who are looking to receive ibogaine treatment, and who can point them to the best resources as they exist in Mexico, where ibogaine is neither legal nor illegal, but within a legal gray area. There are no uniform standards to assure safety or efficacy for the delivery of this medication. And it is a medicine, or a divine medicine, of course. And I reached out to her and I said, Julia told me to call you and ask you about ibogaine. So she told me her story. And she said, well, I had been an opioid addict for about a decade.
Wow.
She was used it all, heroin, fentanyl, all of it, in and out of every form of rehab you can think of. She said, tried abstinence programs. And she said, I underwent medically assisted treatment with Suboxone. And she said, what they won't tell you about Suboxone is that the withdrawal that you will experience if you try to take yourself off of it makes heroin seem like a cakewalk when you go through that withdrawal. She said it was the most horrific thing that she experienced over the course of her addiction arc, as we would call it. She said that she had been in and out of jail. There was a time when she was homeless, and that she became so fatigued with the life that she was having to lead in the U.S. to secure her supply that she went to Colombia to teach English as a second language classes. And she said in Colombia, they have open pharmacy. So you can go in and get whatever you want, as much as you want, for as long as you want, and don't have to worry about anybody looking over your shoulder or about to throw you in jail. And she said, I taught classes for about 1.5 years, and I used as much as I wanted. And she said, one day, I got up out of bed and just looked in the mirror, and I knew that I was going to die.
Yeah.
I knew it. And she explained that she was desperate to give herself one more chance to live and to overcome it. And she just got on the internet and started looking for, putting in any search term she could think of for a treatment for opioid dependency that was not what she had already been through. Mm-hmm. And this word ibogaine kept coming up. She said that she found a provider in Guatemala, just a regular individual, put in a word, looking desperately, found a contact, made contact. And she said, what I didn't know was that ibogaine comes with a very specific risk to the heart. It can be cardiotoxic. So if you give somebody too much, it can stop their heart. And she said that she unfortunately made her way to a practitioner in Guatemala who basically didn't know what they were doing.
Oh, no.
And they gave her twice the amount she should have received. And over the course of the next 2 days, she went into cardiac arrest 6 times.
Wow.
She said, I remember waking up in the intensive care unit of a Guatemalan hospital. And despite everything that had happened, when I opened my eyes, I felt the best I had ever felt in my life. Wow. I could tell that my opioid dependency was gone. I didn't want it. Not only did I not want it, but I never experienced any symptoms of withdrawal. And she said that she had spent years being told that she had a disease, that she would have this disease for the rest of her life. She could never overcome it. The best that she could ever hope for was to effectively treat it so that perhaps she could be functional. And she said, for her, that was very demoralizing. She felt as if she had a personal defect that she would forever be hobbled by having to carry. Mm-hmm. And she said when she woke up, not only was she physiologically restored, but that she felt for the first time in her life in control of herself, in ownership of herself. Right. And she had faith for the first time that she could have a life that would be defined by her choices rather than be driven by compulsion. But the most significant part for her was what she received by way of a concrete affirmation of her human divinity as the child of an eternal creator whose essence is almighty unconditional love, mm-hmm. and that creator had a special purpose to achieve with her life. The very lessons taught to me, life-saving lessons taught to me, mm-hmm. by my grandfathers in those earliest years. When I heard her articulate these realities, and then spoke to dozens of people who had had terminal cases of opioid dependency, right. who endorsed very similar affirmations from their ibogaine treatment, I became convinced that we needed to give the development of ibogaine as a medication an opportunity to succeed in Kentucky, not to replace and to take over an industry, not to become the new end-all, be-all, straitjacket treatment that everybody must matriculate through, but simply an additional therapeutic option that people would choose if they were not being properly served by what we already have. Mm-hmm. That led to the announcement in Kentucky on the grounds of the state capitol on May 31st, where we said, we're going to explore the possibility of using 5% of this settlement money to drive ibogaine through the FDA's drug development process to treat opioid dependency. Mm-hmm. The very best of what we have has about a 25% success rate at the end of 6 months. We have to do better. And unfortunately, at that time, that drew the very pointed and vociferous opposition of current Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, as well as what then was the leadership of the University of Kentucky's Center for Drug and Alcohol Research, an organization which, by virtue of its name, you would think would be academically curious,
sounds like it would be.
and willing to engage, but in fact was very pointedly opposed to any notion that we would do this.
Well, you were not going to be stopped, and then how did you go from that to finding the home for it in Texas?
Well, it was kind of a bumpy ride. Yeah. After the commission announcement on May the 31st, when I first took the job, Kentucky, unfortunately, has an inglorious history of public corruption that places it and Louisiana at kind of the top of the chain when it comes to corrupted systems of governance from the state and local levels. When I was recruited to do the Opioid Commission, my first response was, this is a very treacherous opportunity. There's a lot of vultures who are used to picking the bones of opportunity clean on something like this. If I'm going to take this job, it will be on the condition that we make sure that the commission is accessible to everyday people and organizations that are in the trenches doing the frontline work of combating opioid dependency. That we run it in a way that is transparent so that anybody who wants to know where we've sent the money can click on an interactive map and see where every cent has gone. And that we do so accountably. We present ourselves to the people of the state, we hear what it is that they need, and if we're not doing it right, we be willing to accept their criticism and redirection as to how we need to do better. So it was on these terms that the job was accepted. In keeping with that, I felt it incumbent upon us to have a public hearing framework where we would make ourselves publicly available, we would advertise through media, we would advertise as much as we could, our intent to explore the science, the individual impact, and then finally, at the request of the University of Kentucky, whether the FDA would be willing to approve a drug development trial if we allocated these precious resources for this purpose. So between July and November, we conducted 3 very high-profile public hearings on those subjects. This coincided with a statewide election year in which the guy who appointed me, who was Kentucky Attorney General, ran for governor unsuccessfully and was succeeded by a member of the same party. My boss was a Republican. The guy who was elected to be the new AG was a Republican. After the new guy was elected, I reached out and asked for a meeting to discuss with him the whole rationale of the project. He had been briefed before the Kentucky announcement, but since then, we had received commitments from drug developers to come into the state and philanthropists to partner with the state to execute this entire project. So on December 15th, I was asked to attend a meeting at the state capitol in Frankfurt at 3 p.m. It happened to be a Friday. That should have gave it away. And I walked into what I thought was going to be a very open-minded and collegial discussion about where the project stood and whether it could move forward. I took nothing for granted, but was instead met with what I can only describe as a very malevolent ambush and a demand that I resign my job for having undertaken this project. It happened to coincide with the screening of a documentary called Lamar Odom, My Story, at the Muhammad Ali Center for Peace and Justice in Louisville, Kentucky, where Mr. Odom was going to present to a primarily African-American audience about his own recovery journey of ibogaine, in keeping with what I believe to be the racially unified nature of this mission that's necessary if it's going to be successful.
Wow, that's an interesting synchronicity. That's very, very Celestine prophecy that was happening at the same time.
Brett, that meeting happened at 3 p.m. I walked out at 3:45, crushed.
Yeah.
And because this is a very high profile, public sort of thing, and there was an expectation that, this all be handled very quietly and generically with a resignation letter by the end of the year, I certainly, I had to figure out what was going to happen. The most excruciating part of it was that night in Louisville. At the end of that screening, it was probably 8:30 that night, just roughly about 5 hours after I had left that meeting, watching that audience stand to their feet and ovation at the prospect that Kentucky could lead the nation in creating this sort of breakthrough for individuals like Mr. Odom, for ladies like Ms. Mulligan, and for every strata of American society that had been devastated by the opioid epidemic, knowing that it had just been killed.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Thank goodness. Thank God. There was a gentleman who followed the work that I had done in Kentucky by the name of Rex Elsass. Rex had been a very successful ad producer for Republican candidates for Congress and Senate across the country, as well as governors. Had participated in some presidential campaigns. He had very deep connections within the state of Ohio. His son Reed died tragically of an opioid overdose it was actually a fentanyl overdose in 2019 after struggling for a decade with drug addiction. And Rex had become convinced that had ibogaine been available for his son, he very well may have been able to have a chance to overcome his dependency.
Yeah.
So Rex helped sponsor that screening with Mr. Odom. I told him en route what had happened. And when I got there, he said, if I can find a way to open doors in the state of Ohio, would you work with our foundation to try to keep this alive? I said, Rex, I've put everything I am on the line for this, everything. I'll do anything it takes to try to keep it alive. So from January of 24 until May of 24, I worked extensively with the Reed Foundation, maintained my home in Kentucky, traveled extensively back and forth to Columbus, Ohio, meeting with state legislators, meeting with the leaders of their own opioid commission, meeting with members of the DeWine administration, including Governor DeWine, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Luan Fawn, who is the chair of psychiatry at Ohio State University, telling them everything about ibogaine, describing what the project was in Kentucky, and imploring them to give it consideration in Ohio. They were always very polite. They were always very engaged in discussion, but there wasn't much by way of movement. In May of 24, I received outreach from then Governor Kristi Noem in South Dakota, who had heard about this, and I flew to Sioux City and met with her and members of her administration and some of her political advisors and gave her the whole presentation that I had given in Kentucky to the Attorney General to persuade him to do this project. That touched off another 2 months of meetings and discussions with her and her administration and two of the largest health systems in South Dakota.
Yeah.
The thing which really made that opportunity so exciting was the presence of the Lakota Indian tribe, Native tribe, and the fact that the Pine Ridge Native American Reservation is probably the most impoverished and decimated by substance dependency in the country. And in terms of some folks who should be right at the front of the line to receive this, having that opportunity to plant the project in South Dakota for that purpose had tremendous appeal. Toward the end of July, I got a call from her health services secretary. She said, Bryan, I've got some bad news. We have a ballot measure that will be on the November election, this was November of 24, that will reduce South Dakota's sales tax substantially. And we're looking at a minimum potential deficit of $150 million. We can't even begin to think of moving forward with the announcement of $42 million, and certainly not for a project like this.
Wow.
And at this point, I just thought,
This is so frustrating.
you know,
I mean, especially given your background, this is so frustrating because you've seen people directly struggling, like really struggling, you know, and the use of these opioids just going off the charts. I mean, which is a well-known story right now, but to be up close and personal like that and seeing it.
I don't know what to do now.
Yeah.
And it was probably about a week after that, maybe 10 days. Enough for me to worry and have some sleepless nights and to feel them. I got a call from the leaders of some organizations in Texas that have the advancement of mental health treatment and improvements within mental health treatment systems. They reached out to me, a gentleman by the name of Logan Davidson, an organization called Texans for Greater Mental Health. They said, hey, we've been following what you've been doing in Kentucky. Texas in 2021 passed a $2 million psilocybin research bill attached to the Baylor College of Medicine. We think Texas is prime for its next big psychedelic project. We've got a $16 billion budget surplus in 2025. Do you have any recommendations as to what we should do? I said, well, it's interesting you ask, because I sure do. And I laid out what I had tried to do in Kentucky and said, I think Texas needs to finish the job I began there. And they said, well, we'll go and talk to a couple of state legislators. Give us about a week and we'll get back to you. I said, okay. Now, Brett, I really, you know, people all the time want their legislature to do something. And I had no idea what the lay of the landscape was here, aside from the fact that Governor Perry, who had been introduced to me in June of 23, was a supporter of ibogaine. He had generously recorded a support video for my commission that was played in September of 23. And he had drafted and signed on to an op-ed that appeared in Newsweek magazine, along with Morgan and Marcus Luttrell and Dakota Meyer, who's a Congressional Medal of Honor winner and Kentucky native, endorsing the Kentucky effort. And that was in Newsweek magazine in October of 23, just a little over a month before I was asked to leave. So about a week later, I get a request for another call, and they said, hey, we've talked to some legislators and we think we got some sponsors. Wow. Would you be willing to help us do this? And so, well, I've got to make a phone call and I'll get back to you. I reached out to Governor Perry and I said, hey, I know you folks in Texas take great pride in who you are, and I'm not from there, but I think there's an opportunity. And I described for him what it was. And I said, I think we can get this Kentucky Plain salvaged and maybe replatform it right there in your front yard. What do you think? So he discussed how he came to know ibogaine, his own personal conviction that when it came to what he would do with the rest of his life, that there was nothing more important he could do than to try to bring it into medical reality within the United States. And he said, you know, I don't want to put anything more on you than what you want to take, but if you're willing to come down here and, you know, be present as much as possible, I'll be happy to coach the team if you'll be the quarterback and throw the ball down the field.
All right.
I said, there's nothing I'd enjoy more.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful.
So that was how the entire Texas campaign started.
Yeah.
And thanks to some wonderful U.S. Special Forces veterans, veterans who are not Special Forces, veteran groups, Texans for Greater Mental Health, my dear friend, Logan Davidson, who was a suffering brother right shoulder to shoulder through every worry, anxiety, and scrape on the knee that we got.
Yeah.
We conducted a blistering, pedal to the metal, 6-month introduction, education, and persuasion campaign of 188 Texas legislators, 181 of whom, between the House and the Senate, voted to approve this plan, fully funded with $50 million at the end of the Texas legislative session of 2025, approved by Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who was the toughest nut to crack of the bunch, after a meeting I had with him on May the 14th, and then signed by Governor Abbott on June the 9th of 2025.
Yeah, incredible. Really incredible. And, you know, Logan's been over to our home, but I actually did not know. He's very rooted in humility like you. I did not know that he was the one that reached out to you to actually get this done. That is pretty damn cool.
He was my right hand throughout the entire process. Yeah. He and a gentleman by the name of Luis Sanchez, they were able to get the appointments, get me on the calendar, get me in front of the folks who need to be talked to and persuaded. There was a beautiful group of Texans whose own families had been impacted by substance and alcohol dependency issues, who, as they learned what ibogaine could do, just said, let us know who you need to talk to, when you need to talk to them, where we need to be, who we've got to make a call to. Let us know whatever you need, whenever you need it, and we will be there to make it happen.
Yeah.
And it was a full court press of aligned hearts and minds that wanted to see the improvement of the human condition for those who are at the very bottom of the existence barrel. And the fact that we pulled this off in Texas is what I hope will be just the beginning of a fundamental transformation that will play out at scale, not just within the American medical system, but within American society more broadly.
Yeah. Well, as someone who was actually born here in Austin, when I was born, it was the size of Anchorage, Alaska.
Oh, gosh.
It was a very small town. It was Willie Nelson was the biggest thing going on here. That was the first concert. I saw him when I was like 4 years old. And really the ethos of Austin, it's really well captured in the Tao of Willie, which he wrote that book with Turk Pipkin, who's a friend of mine. We were big supporters of his initiative in Kenya alongside his wife to build high schools in areas that didn't have them, called the Nobility Project. But the Tao of Willie is very strong. And, one thing that is really special about Willie Nelson, among many things, he's really the embodiment of love, is he would always say, it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat, we just get together and talk about all the things we have in common and get after it and, work together and have a beer, And that's always been deep in the Austin ethos. And, what you feel here, during South by Southwest or other events is really, that embodiment of people saying, let's really work together, which is what humanity needs at large, and what we need in America and what we need to ultimately unify around the most important development in human history, which is this rise of AI, quantum computing, robotics, brain-computer interfaces, and this exponential curves we're on, which humanity has prioritized with now $7 trillion of money towards the development of AGI, or artificial general intelligence, which can allow for all types of amazing medical breakthroughs, energy breakthroughs, you name it, to create a world of abundance for everyone if we choose it, right? If we actually choose that with our free will. So this moment with AI, quantum computing, robotics, brain-to-computer interfaces, what I've seen in my journeys is this is the penultimate for humanity to make a fateful choice to allow love to conquer fear, so that together we can rise and create abundance on this beautiful planet. How do you see this moment?
Well, there are certainly plenty of reason to be optimistic in terms of potential capacity to create abundance for all. But we have to be we've got to be very candid about where we find ourselves as a society. Over the past 30 years, America has experienced the institutional criminality of systems that are supposed to serve and protect us, but that have instead produced the opioid epidemic, which is the single gravest engineered humanitarian catastrophe to play out within our borders since the end of the 19th century. The 2008 financial crisis, which cost millions of Americans their claim to the American dream and then sent them the bill for the expense of their dispossession. And then 25 years of unremittent warfare, which has cost exponentially more service member lives here at home by suicide than have been lost on battlefields abroad. Right. Alexis de Tocqueville is known for Democracy in America. He's lesser known for a book that is, in my opinion, of equal relevance to today, and it's called A History of the Ancient Regime. And it is about the conditions that prevailed in France before, during, and after the French Revolution. And when we look at what de Tocqueville has to say about France prior to 1789 and the French Revolution, the parallels between it and the United States are eerie, not because of any defect within our society. We live within the most beautifully dynamic multicultural society that has ever existed. Unfortunately, power, especially the power of officialdom, is the greatest criminal that we have among us. In pre-revolutionary France, the government ruthlessly imposed its burdens, brutally extracted its costs, and ravenously consumed the future of its people. That should sound familiar, because if it doesn't, then only thing need happen is go through a tour of everyday middle and small town America and look at and feel where people are, as measured by those metrics we talked about at the beginning of this podcast. If we're going to have this future of abundance, We have got to clear the rot
Yep.
out of the people's temple, and that is the civic system that is going to have to be competent and honest in order to help properly shepherd this future transformation as you see it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And, one of the chapters in the book that I'm coming out with is on geopolitics. And, these technologies, it is God working through us is the way it's come to me. And we're the hands. And it's a forcing function moment. One thing that's difficult to talk about, which is an unfortunate history of the country, is, this country had slaves. A lot of places in the world had slaves, and some places still have slaves in the world. And it helped bootstrap capitalism prior to the age of machines. And then the Industrial Revolution led to that practice being unmasked for what it was, whereas an othering, treating people as subhuman. And that led to this moment where that practice was no longer allowed. And obviously we had, unfortunately, a civil war to get to that point. And I think that this moment for humanity, the way it's going to go down, it's murky, right? In terms of, I wrote a science fiction novella, The Latticed, which I gave you today, which is a positive way of the way it could go down, which the protagonist, Dr. Alexander Bliss, has this audacious idea to hook up everybody from psychonauts to spiritual teachers, spiritual masters like the Dalai Lama, deep meditators, etc., to these interfaces to find what is the commonality in their experience. And they find that our actual reality is deeply rooted in love and connectedness. And we've all, anybody that's had a very intentional psychedelic experience, I'm not talking about parties but you go with great intentionality, usually finds that that's the reality that we're actually in. John Mackey wrote about it in the first chapter of his book, The Whole Story, that's what got him over the fear of starting Whole Foods. He was on episode 30 of this podcast. And that's a positive way that it could happen. But I think the way it's going to go down is that as these technologies manifest, and we are manifesting them, but again, we're the hands, we're going to be able to see what abundance looks like. We're going to be able to see a future, and this is all going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years, of energy that's so abundant from the sun. 18 seconds of the sun's rays, if we could just capture them through a material science breakthrough, would power the world's energy needs for over a year.
Yeah.
You can desalinate everywhere in the world if you have abundant energy. Places like Chad, we have real problems here at home with America, as you pointed out. Those are very real problems. Our GDP here is around $86,000 a person. We're the richest country in the world. Chad, it's $660 a person. And my book starts out with the personification of this Uber driver that picked me up. You're about to have an Uber driver pick you up here. And he was from Chad. I didn't know anything about Chad. It's a country in Africa. I'm using ChatGPT to find out about it. We both lit up, we were just meant to really get to know each other. And I'm learning about it, and I'm like, well, what does it feel like in a country with $660 GDP a person? You don't have stable electricity, you don't have clean water, you don't food, healthcare, et cetera. The abundance we have here, and not everybody here has abundance, of course, but the abundance we have here is unimaginable in a place like Chad. And so I think what's going to happen here, and the way to save a place like Chad, is through robots and this acceleration, because we've got to get to a point where the cost of providing things goes way, way, way down. And that is what this acceleration is going to lead to. But I think it's going to be us glimpsing it together and saying, as humanity, let's choose that. And that does mean that power structures are going to change. They have to change. They have to change. And so it's going to be bottoms up pressure and it's going to be tops down. And, think about India pre-Gandhi. It was 15,000 British that were trying to control them. And through nonviolence, Gandhi was just like Neo in the Matrix. No, we're not going to take this. We are going to change this situation. And I think humanity is going to demand it. And I think the leaders and these power structures which focus on oppression and putting profits over people, whether that's corporations or government, are going to have to change. They're going to be forced to change, and it's going to be a very, very interesting place to. I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see this play out. And that's why I'm putting it all out there with this project, with the book, is like trying to help humanity have a heart shift so that we allow love to conquer fear, collectively unify and make it to that place where we're going to have heaven on earth.
Well, this gets into the importance of the advancement of plant medicine broadly and ibogaine specifically.
Yeah.
If we are nihilist, if we think this is all just a random accident of astrophysics, it makes the achievement of the future that you reference much more difficult to achieve within the minds and hearts of people who think that this has no higher purpose than immediate physical indulgence and comfort.
Right.
If we have the opportunity to platform, for instance, ibogaine as a breakthrough therapeutic in the most existential crises we have in front of us as American society, and those are the twin crises of addiction and trauma that are in existence at scale, then we offer up an opportunity for individuals to understand concretely, individually, persuasively, how they are sacred,
right,
uniquely sacred, and how they are the ultimate expression of that benevolent love that our eternal Creator has at the very heart of the Creator's essence.
Yeah. And amen to that. That's absolutely right.
You can hear something, you can agree something, and you can believe it. It's a whole order of magnitude different to know it.
Yeah, that's right.
And thank God that these plants have been put here so that if we choose to know who we really are, we can have that opportunity. There's a tremendous amount of ferment, I think, not just within the United States, but globally, where there is a recognition of the dire need for a fundamental shift toward a collective spiritual recognition of the sacredness of the human experience. And I hope and pray that Governor Perry and I will be good and faithful servants of that opportunity as it continues to emerge, not just through volitional engagement, but by necessity in order to achieve the future that you can identify as possible.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. And that's why, I've kind of joked around, but it's a very serious subject that, Ghostbusters, which came out in 1984, they always said, don't cross the streams. And this podcast has crossed all the streams. And the reason why is that our actual reality matters for humanity to make it. And, Gary Zukov wrote about this in the book, The Seed of the Soul, that if we stay locked into this 5 sensory framework, that this is all there is, ignoring the fact that we have a soul, that we're actually in a spiritual reality, that we're souls having a physical experience right here, that does lead you to, it can lead you to a more nihilistic worldview, where it's like, well, let's get all we can, right? Yeah. You only live once, and it's every spiritual tradition, again, that shows you that never creates lasting happiness. There is no lasting happiness in any physical accumulation of goods. It's only through having an experience in this body where you are living your purpose and your mission and realize the divinity within you and can have a communion with your soul. And, for me, I grew up, mostly agnostic, to be honest. I definitely prayed, and prayer has been a part of my steadying practice to be an entrepreneur. I've put myself under pretty extreme stress as a result of that. Lots of times where it wasn't clear if we were going to make payroll and all types of things. But I want to be very clear. This is not the type of stress of people working manual labor jobs just to make ends meet. It's a different type of stress. It's a lot of psychological stress of, oh my gosh, this may fail and I'm responsible for all these people's job type of stress. And that power of prayer and those experiences I've had, deep experiences with God where I knew God was present, but then actually having a direct communion through plant-based medicine, it's a different thing. It's a different thing, and after you've had that and you realize that's your actual reality, it transforms you for the rest of your life. And I've told friends it is like the Matrix moment in the sense of, I don't believe we live in a simulation. That's not why I'm referencing the Matrix, but it is a Matrix moment in terms of you take the red pill and you realize, oh my gosh, like the prophets in all these spiritual texts were right. We are all interconnected. There is this divine force that cares about us, that loves us all unconditionally, that has infinite, boundless love for us. And realizing that, I think one thing, Bryan, that you may not be thinking of, because not a lot of people are talking about this, is that this exponential curve that we're in is not just about automation, abundance, this barrier to creativity being shattered, all the beautiful things that are going to happen as a result of it. It's also about spiritual awakening, because we only know what 4% of the universe is made of. We call that matter. We don't even know what the other 96% is. We call that dark energy and dark matter. And what we're going to find as we go through this exponential curve is it's going to allow us to decode what our actual reality is. And I'm not saying that we'll ever understand the full nature of God. I don't think that's possible to understand a creator that, birthed this universe and cares about us all. But we're going to understand more and more about the nature of our reality, and that it is rooted deeply in spirituality, because we know that's the truth. We've had that communion. Once you've had that communion, it's real. That is, in near-death experiences. I had Eben Alexander on for episode 46. He calls that the ultra real, that it's realer than this. And so I think that that's something that's underestimated, how this exponential curve is actually going to take us into that too.
Any avenue that helps us to have a greater, more personal understanding of just how divine we are as an expression of that creator, whose mysteries will be even greater illuminated by that exponential curve, is a fabulous thing to celebrate.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Well, I highly recommend, if people have an interest in this, to watch In Waves and War, which is on Netflix. It came out in October. That's a great documentary about Navy SEALs that really are having transformational, transcendent experiences with ibogaine and getting a new lease on life.
I think that probably is the best and the latest and greatest of any of the offerings that I could individually recommend to anyone.
Yeah, I've seen one that's coming out, which is Dr. Martin Polanco has been working on, which is fantastic. He leads Mission Within. So I can't wait for that one to come out. I'm not sure of the current status, but a lot of this content is going to be coming out to really show how this gives people a new lease on life. And I'm just super proud that we support the Americans for Ibogaine initiative. I mean, the goal here with this is to get to the point where this becomes legal in more places, hopefully in the entire United States, to give people this new lease on life that are really suffering. And it is part of the consciousness awakening, without a doubt.
Well, right now, as we sit here on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, 2026, there are approximately 9 states that have bills that have either been introduced or are about to introduce to directly fund their partnership with Texas to expand the scope, scale, and speed of this particular drug development trial.
Fantastic.
All of these states have been led down this direction by Governor Perry and I as we shepherd what is a multi-state coalition that will constitute the unstoppable external force that will make the federal government be dutifully responsive to making sure that we can medicalize this medicine as expeditiously and safely as possible. Nothing like this has been done in history, and it is a fabulous honor to serve it. Thank you, Brett, for your support of Americans for ibogaine. All of this takes an immense amount of resource and effort. And with the continued support of individuals like you who align in mind and heart with what we're doing, we will be successful.
Well, thank you so much. And I would recommend to people that they watch you and Governor Perry on the Joe Rogan podcast. That was a great episode where you talk a lot about the science and how much this can actually de-age the brain, and it's just incredible. But I just love your heart, brother. Thank you so much. Yeah, you're a good man, and I wish you much success in helping humanity. This is Team Humanity all the way.
Thank you, sir.
Well, thanks again, everybody, for tuning in to the Love Conquers Fear podcast. Wow, what an episode. I just absolutely love Bryan's heart. It's been a dream to get him on ever since we've had the dinner here at our home. I hope that you support the Americans for Ibogaine initiative. I'll put a link here in the show notes. This is part of the awakening that humanity needs. There's a lot of people out there suffering from opioid addiction, alcoholism, as well as from all types of suicidal thoughts from, suffering during combat, serving this nation and around the world. And so hopefully you'll lean in and support and join us in that. And thanks again for all the shares, all the heart you're expressing to me. This is my love letter to humanity. It's going to take us all, Team Humanity all the way. We're in the penultimate moment, and I appreciate you being on the Love Conquers Fear journey. Thank you.